Amen. So today, again, it's kind of weird that we're kind of doing this worship service via the internet and via kind of your computers or smartphones or tablets or whatever it is that you're currently viewing on. It's really kind of strange. Also, it's kind of weird because we're recording this at one point early on in the week, and you may be watching it at any point in the week. So it's like I'm speaking to you from the past, but also it's kind of the present. So it's really kind of a weird sort of notion. We're going to try to make that as normal as possible. But it's weird. It's weird. I want you to know that we know that this time is weird, and we're going to try to just kind of name that and be like, hey, you know what? This is not the way that it normally is. But through the miracle of technology, we're able to be together, and that is so good. Just as a personal note, I just want to say this. I miss you guys. It is lonely in this city without you. Not that the city itself is able to kind of meet outside, but I guess my world is a little bit more empty without you guys. Oddly enough, the chaos and the drama you bring to my life is absent, and I found that I'm pretty bored with just my Netflix fake drama. So I'm binging on things like Riverdale and stuff because I need that angst in my life. So thank you for that. I'm not saying that, but anyway, I know that you're probably watching a lot of Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. You know what I'm saying? Thankful for that Frozen 2 drop that we got. Praise the Lord for that. I started this series, and hey, it's going to make a comeback in this one, this sermon today as well. So anyway, just kind of wanted to say that. Today we are going to be continuing, oddly enough, in week 3 of this series that is called What They Meant for Evil. What They Meant for Evil. And we're following the story of Joseph. And today, serendipitously, we are going to be talking about when Joseph was in prison. Boy, does that feel relevant right now, right? As we are all kind of in quarantine prison, isolation, 6 feet away prison, even in our homes, except for dogs. Thankfully, Fisher and Daisy, very loved and cared for. They're not quarantined. They would not stand for it if that were the case. They would be like, give me hugs or give me death. And so you make it both, but it doesn't affect dogs, praise God. In any case, we're going through this story of Joseph, thinking about today how he's in prison. Now, if you remember, we left off. He had been sold into slavery by his brothers, no less, and then he was in Potiphar's house, and then he was accused of impropriety with Potiphar's wife. This was his slave master, so Potiphar, his master, was pretty upset with him and threw him into prison. And that's where we pick up today. I'm going to be reading a lot from Genesis, part of chapter 39, a little bit from chapter 40, and a lot from chapter 41. Here's what I would encourage you to do, though. This is a lot of reading. I'm not going to read every verse in this, but instead I would really encourage you to go back and read, especially chapters 40 and 41 of Genesis on your own. See what the Lord speaks to you. But we know that our attention spans kind of are limited when we're watching online and stuff. So I want to just encourage you to go and read that on your own. Okay? So we are going to pick up. But the question that I really want us to think about today is simple. What happens to your dreams when they're squashed? What happens to your dreams when they're delayed? What happens when what you hoped would be the outcome isn't the reality? That's what we're going to be talking about with Joseph today. You see, Joseph, as you remember, was a dreamer. He started out as one that God seemed to give all of these dreams, and his dreams kind of got him in trouble. It seemed that after he was thrown into a pit and then sold into slavery, when he was accused in his slaver's home, and then now in prison, it seems like those dreams just continue to dwindle. When I think about the story of Joseph, I can't help but think of an old poem that I learned in high school. Here's what that poem says. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? These words in the poem A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes gives us an idea of what it's like to wrestle with dreams that have been delayed or disappointed. When your hopes for the future are gone. Now, we're dealing right now with a lot of dreams that have at least been deferred, if not destroyed altogether. For some of you who are seniors, you are mourning the loss of your senior spring. There's no getting that back. For others of you, spring break plans were canceled. For others of you, just a normalcy of going to your campus community, whether it's your campus ministry or your other organizations on campus, just the normalcy of going to class. Never thought that I would miss, all of the students that are in my classes, but boy, do I right now, and I bet that you do too. To just sit through another lecture that kind of puts you to sleep, just because it's normal. And like the poem says, there's all kinds of responses. Some of us, when our dreams are deferred, it feels like we're drying up. It feels like we're festering. It feels like we're just callous and all crusted over. For some of us, it sags. So for some of us, it feels like there's an explosion going on. Today, we're kind of looking at that with Joseph. What do you do when your dreams are deferred? Now, again, if you've been watching Disney Plus and going through all of the library, then you got to know that Frozen 2 is out there, right? And you can watch this on there. I'm not going to spoil the movie because what a gem of a movie that is, and man, I would never take that away from you. But toward the end of the movie, there is a song that is this beautiful song with an incredible message. Sometimes I think that Disney, Pixar, any of these movie companies that are geared toward kids, they're speaking really to the parents, because as I watch this at my age, no longer thinking like an adolescent, I'm like, oh my gosh, Elsa, Anna, you get me. No one else gets me, but Anna gets me. Thank you, Disney, for speaking into my life. And then I watch with Ben or Molly's kids, Emma Kate or Hannah, and they're watching. They're like, oh, Olaf's so funny. I'm like, shut up. This is about me, okay? They're like, Anna is speaking into my life, and they're like, oh, Olaf is so goofy. We're done. At the end of the movie, there's a song where Anna is in a pretty difficult spot. And she says, the only thing left for me to do is to do the next right thing. What do we do when times are uncertain, when dreams are deferred? We do the next right thing. If you're anything like me, you want to do not only the next right thing, but you want to figure out what the next 10 right things are. When you don't get the job, when the relationship fails, when the plans that you had, the hopes that you had for your life, the dream that you thought was God-given falls by the wayside, you want to completely refigure that and build it back up, and yet God seems silent. What do? What is the next right thing? In our story from Genesis, chapters 39, 40, and 41, here's a few key verses. We left off with this verse a couple weeks ago in part 2 of this, when Joseph is thrown into prison. It says, but while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And so even though he is in prison, Joseph has found favor with God. Now, it doesn't necessarily say that Joseph is aware of that. It just, in hindsight, the words of the book of Genesis tell us that God was with him. The warden put Joseph in charge of all those he held in prison. He was made responsible for all that was done there. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So even in prison, Joseph has this ability to kind of do the next right thing. He's able to work alongside this warden. He finds favor, influence with the warden, and the warden puts him in charge of things, even though he's in prison. Which brings us to chapter 40. It says, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. See how everything kind of comes together? Like it's like God seems to be bringing people into Joseph's life, but it's really through anger from the Pharaoh. Really interesting stuff. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Now, after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. Let's stop there for a second. Joseph and these two, the cupbearer and the baker, are all in custody, in jail, in quarantine. They're in isolation. This was not the dream that they had for this part of their life. This was not the dream that they had for this particular season or chapter in their grand saga. Joseph does not particularly want chapter 40 of his life to be in the prison. And yet he is. So he notices something. He notices something while he's in quarantine, while he's in prison. And he notices that they are dejected, that the people around him are heartbroken, sad. So he asked them, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they answered this, "We both had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Now, I know that they're talking about dreams that are like the things that we have at night, the storylines that our heart kind of creates for us, and our minds help us to process the life around us. I get that. But I love the way that they say it. We both had dreams. How do we make sense of this? How do we make sense of this right here, right now? Because it doesn't feel like there's any sense to it. Fortunately, Joseph majored in dream interpretation. He majored in dreams, and he is the one for them. So he said, do not interpretations belong to God. Do not interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. And I love that. He says, so share them with me. Why are you dejected? Tell me about your dreams. I think that that's one of the things that I miss the most about our community. Because in our small groups, whether it was Spark groups, Ember groups, Phoenix groups, or even coffee or lunch or whatever it was, we would often talk about what our dreams were. Plans, we would call them more often than not. What's your plan after graduation? What's your plan for the weekend? And what's your plan for lunch? Let's go get lunch together. And the days of plan making are put on hold for us. And yet Joseph asks anyway, tell me about your dreams. And then they begin to tell him some of their dreams. And you can read the specifics of those dreams in the rest of chapter 40. The cupbearer and the baker both tell dreams, and there's some pretty key symbols in them. One of the dreams means something pretty good. The other one is a very warranted fear, and it doesn't end so well for one of them. But Joseph interprets both of them. After Joseph interprets one of their dreams, he says to him, the cupbearer, he says, when all goes well with you, when all of this is over, when we're out of quarantine, when you're out of quarantine, when you're out of prison, you're back in Pharaoh's service, show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. We're like, yes, get us out of this prison right now. Yeah, I got it. And then Joseph tells a little bit of his story and his own dreams. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here, I have done nothing to deserve being put in this dungeon. Joseph who had dreams back when he was about 17, 18 years old, got squashed by the world. And here, many years later, when he's about 28, he begins to tell a story of how his dreams came to where they currently are. I was taken. This is what happened in my dreams. There's something holy and sacred that happens when we're having these conversations with one another. What has happened in your life that took you off course? What has happened in your life that's made you kind of wonder, where's God? What plans have you had to put on hold because it just seemed like the world wasn't fair? Joseph has these conversations, and sure enough, the cupbearer ends up back in Pharaoh's service, whereas the baker, well, things don't go well for him. He's punished and he's put to death by the Pharaoh. But it says that on the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all of his officials, and he lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, though, even though he was restored, did not remember Joseph. In fact, he forgot him. The next line is chilling. It says, 2 full years had passed. Joseph thought that from this moment of making this connection with the cupbearer, of having this moment with one of Pharaoh's officials, this was his ticket out, right? 2 years later, he's still in the same spot. 2 years later, he's still in prison. His prison lasted a little longer than he imagined, and that's usually the way that things like that go. We're usually in that weird place of what's the next right thing for longer than we ever dreamed that we would be. But, as the story goes, Pharaoh began to have some dreams. And these dreams kept him up late at night. These dreams had him kind of trying to figure out, he just could not get them out of his head. And as soon as he had one dream, he had this next dream that was just basically the same dream, but it's just there's something going on and Pharaoh just can't figure it out. So what does he do? He calls upon everybody, all of the chief magicians and all of the seers and everyone that could possibly be of any help to him. And he says, hey, help me figure out these dreams that I'm beginning to have. What is it all about? Is it hope? Is it fear? What's going on? And yet no one in the entire land is able to interpret these dreams. That's when the cupbearer, 2 years after the conversation was had, the cupbearer says, I know a guy. He's down in the prison. He's Joseph. He's well-built and handsome, if you remember from last time's sermon. He does this. He does this for a living. Let's bring him up. So they bring Joseph up to the Pharaoh. They give him a clean shave, make him look pretty good because he's got to be presentable to the Pharaoh. And then the Pharaoh tells him the dream. Pharaoh said to him, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I've heard that it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. But I want you to listen to what Joseph says. Joseph says, I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires, which is a pretty amazing thing to say to someone that everyone reveres as a God. That the God of me, Joseph, God of the Hebrews over here, he's the one that will interpret this dream for you. Pharaoh tells him his dream, and long and short of it is this. Joseph says, your dream is a warning. We'll have 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of hard times. So what we need to do is we need to stockpile for 7 years so that in the following 7 we can make it out of this alive. Pharaoh is enamored by this interpretation. So what does he do? He puts Joseph in charge of it. He says, okay, I'm a very busy Pharaoh. Joseph, I want you to be the one to enact this plan. This plan is going to be a 14-year plan. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. This isn't the sort of thing that happens overnight. Instead, Joseph has to build up systems and structures, and he's got to do the right thing for 7 years so he can do the right thing for 7 more years after that. Fortunately, Joseph has a long tradition of patience in his life. And maybe from the pit all the way to Egypt, God has been preparing him to be a patient, disciplined, diligent person. Some lessons you just can't learn outside of all of these trials. Some lessons you got to learn in the school of hard knocks, and that is exactly where Joseph has been. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." He grabs a signet ring, which is the ring that government officials and pharaohs would use to basically give their stamp of official approval. He gives him his own ring. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. "Make way," people would shout. And thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word no one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt." Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. And it happened just as Joseph said. For 7 years there would be abundance, and for 7 there would be famine. And Joseph got to work. Chapter 41 ends when it says, "The famine had spread all over the whole country, and Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was that severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere." A few notes for us. What are you doing during your prison chapter? What are you doing during your quarantine, isolation chapter or season of your life? Are you moping? Sometimes I am. Are you hopeless? Sometimes I am. But can we be like Joseph and be one who's just going to do the next right thing? We're going to listen to the cupbearer and the baker, to the family member that's dejected, and we're going to share our own experience as well. Joseph also pointed them and himself back to God. God is mentioned, but God doesn't seem particularly active during this time. But even when it doesn't seem like God is working, God is still working. And that is such a truth of the Christian faith. The third thing that we see in this passage, or in all of this saga, is that Joseph finds ways to use his unique gifts even while he's in prison. What has God made you for? Are you an encourager? How are you encouraging people in your life, even over distance right now? Are you a server? How are you serving people? In your home? In your friend groups, even though you can't be with them? How are you using your God-given abilities to make a difference for other people? Joseph did that. And we can use excuses all day long, like, well, if this would happen or if this would happen. But the truth is, we do the next right thing exactly where we are. The final thing that I'd say to you is this. When we stay connected to God, when the moment of opportunity comes, we'll be ready for it. So stay connected to God. Do not neglect your prayers. Don't neglect reading Scripture. Don't neglect having conversations with your brothers and sisters in faith. You need each other. Use the miracle of technology to be present with each other, even when you're so far apart. What is the next right thing for you? What is the thing that you can do? Who you are during this time of isolation and quarantine will determine who you will be beyond it. Who you are now will determine who you are in the future. As for me, I want to be as faithful as possible so that when all of this is over, that this trial has not been wasted. That I'm better for it, and maybe the world is too. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you that you never waste a trial. You don't cause them, but you don't waste them. So today, we offer all that we are and all that we have to you. Use this time of isolation and quarantine to reveal yourself to us and to reveal our true heart, who you've created us to be. Help us, God. Holy Spirit, fill us now that we might make a difference in the world, in our families, in our relationships around us. Give us creativity and ideas for how you can use us. All that we are is yours, God. Our eyes are on you. Help us to do the next right thing. In your name.